Hi, welcome to StashBlaster Quilts. My name is Maria Spatelnik, and I am here to help you make more quilts in less time with a lot less stress. So, those of you who've been watching know that I'm a professional organizer by trade, so we always start with an organizing tip. So this time I would like to start with the idea of doing a brain dump. For most of us that are currently out here in 2022, I'm not sure when you're going to be watching this, but in 2022, a lot of us are coming out of the whole staying at home for COVID thing, trying to reintegrate into meeting people out in the world and doing things outside. A lot of stuff is still virtual. So trying to keep track of everything and what do I owe to whom and how and when and where and all of that can be very overwhelming. And so for a lot of people, what happens is that their brain just starts to spin. And they are trying to remember everything. And so you're going to sleep and you're like, I've got to remember to schedule the oil change, And so you keep running it through your head again and again and again, trying to make sure that you remember it. You're much better off to just brain dump. So starting maybe tomorrow, you get yourself a nice journal type notebook if you'd like. You can do it in anything you like. Just start writing down all of the things that you need to accomplish. You can have another page that's what your goals are. You can have a bucket list page. Any sort of information that just kind of floats around in the back of your head and bangs other ideas out of the way. Because that's what happens to me. I'll be thinking about a new quilt pattern, and then all of a sudden I'll remember that I need to call the handyman to fix the toilet, and that kind of pushes my quilt pattern out of my head. So just write everything down. Once it's down, you can sort it, you can reorganize it, you can have it make more sense. But the nice thing is, once it's on paper, the paper will remember it for you. You don't have to be worried about remembering. So if I'm in a particularly stressful time, I have a notepad right next to my bed. I can go ahead, I have a very low wattage light that I can flip on, and I can write a note. I tried writing them in the dark, but it came out looking like hieroglyphics, or if you're a Trekkie fan, Klingon. So write it down. Doesn't matter if it makes 100% sense, just write it down. And then in the morning, you can pick it up and deal with it. But once it's out of your head, it's not going to pester you. You're going to sleep a lot better, and you won't forget it, so you won't have that anxiety. So going ahead and giving yourself a brain dump is a wonderful way to start getting yourself pulled back together, and having a notebook handy so you can always add to it is very helpful in helping you reduce that stress level. So that's our tip for today. So on to some other good news. The website is up. Scott got it up. We have been fighting this for months, and then taxes got in the way and a whole bunch of other stuff happened. So it's one of these things where one provider will say that it's not their fault, it's the other guy's fault, and then the other guy says it's not his fault, it's this other guy's fault. And so trying to get it all figured out as to who was to blame for the problem took a long time. And Scott finally had enough time in one chunk to just keep pounding on the guys until we got answers. So, StashBlasterQuilts.com is currently up and running. If at any point you go to it and it doesn't work, shoot me an email. The email always works. And say, hey, your site's down. And we'll start yelling at people again. But it's up. So I'm very happy about that. I am going to be in Nebraska in Scotts Bluff in June. I'm going to be in Pittsburgh and Chicago in August and September. So if you happen to know a quilt guild that might be interested in one of my classes, either the Sewing Room Organization class or workshop or something like that, or if you're there, please feel free to let me know, and then maybe we can meet up at some point or chat when I'm there, or you can tell me what I should see while I'm in town. That would be wonderful. So just so you know, Scotts Bluff, Pittsburgh, and Chicago. So that's what's going on here. By the way, if you enjoy all of this stuff that we do here, the tip, or just the yakety yak that happens, or the quilt that we're working on, please like, subscribe, hit the bell if you want to be notified when I'm doing these. The live streams are always going to be the first and third Wednesday of the month. Now, there may occasionally be something where I'm out of town and I can't do it, in which case I'll give you plenty of notice. But for the most part, you can count on the first and third Wednesday of the month at 7 o'clock. Okay, but if time starts to permit, because things have been insanely busy here, I'm going to start putting up some other videos that I've shot, but I have to edit. I never knew that editing was going to take 3 times or more times as long to edit as it did to shoot the stinker in the first place. So that's why there isn't the time. So I've shot a bunch of stuff, but the editing process takes a very long time. And I just haven't had big enough chunks of time to do it. And it's not something you can do 5 minutes at a time. I can quilt 5 minutes at a time because I can be running my 4 patches or a pattern or something through once I've got everything stacked up ready to go. And if I have 5 minutes, I can do that. But editing, trying to match things up and make it all work and look like a regular person doing it, it's really hard and takes a long time. So that's why those are behind. I think it's more important that we work on our project together and that, you know, I'm doing some of this other stuff with you and for you. So the editing is sitting there, it's waiting, and it will ultimately get done. So I think that catches us up for this session. I want to say this week, but it's 2 weeks in between or 3 weeks depending on the end of the month. So, okay, if this is your first time here, starting in January, we started putting a quilt together. I offered 4 different styles of quilts, and then I put it out there, and the subscribers voted. And so once we picked the type, then I developed a couple of different patterns right in front of everybody, and then they picked the pattern that they wanted, and now we've been sewing that pattern. And that's this quilt over here. So if you take a look, you can see that I have my center section 4 patches done. It's a 12 by 12 grid of 4 patches. Okay, and they finish at 2 inches, and now we're going to do the next ring out, which finishes at 4. So they're both at 4.5 inches raw right now. These little blue things you see are painter's tape. Now, I have been using painter's tape on my quilts forever and ever. Unfortunately, the last roll of painter's tape that I bought, I didn't buy. My husband bought for me. And this is much stickier. And it will adhere to your quilt if you iron it. In fact, it'll adhere if it just feels like it. So I'm using the painter's tape. I'm sticking it on very lightly. And I'm making sure it's nowhere near the iron. The older version I had, I ironed right over, and it was fine. It came off just fine. But this stuff, I don't know what the different glue is, but it is determined that it's going to stay on my quilt. So I'm going to make the suggestion, if you've seen my past videos and I've recommended painter's tape and told you not to worry about it, start worrying about it. Test your painter's tape first. So if you put it on and it really, you know, I would take it and push it down on a scrap piece, you know, make sure it's on there nice and secure, then try to peel it off. If you have to fight to peel it off, that's a problem. The older version of painter's tape, it would be on there, but it was fairly easy to take off. And so test whatever kind you get before you do a whole lot with it. Okay, so let me switch cameras so you can see what I'm doing here. Alright, let me move these over. While I was waiting to start, I was spinning up these little spools, and I'll talk to you about that in a second. So, here we go. So this is A1. So I'm going to match A1, A2, A3, A4, and then that's how I'm going to build my 4 patches 2 at a time. Now, the reason this is A1 instead of 1A is because when I started putting the painter's tape on, I started with the centers, because I was talking to someone at the time, completely forgot the top 2 rows. So I have a row, you can't see it, but for example, this one is 9A and 9B. So we have a 4.5 inch 4 patch and then the 4.5 inch 16 patch. These are going to get sewed together as C and D are going to get sewn together. So this is how I normally do it. I do the block number and then A, B, C, D. And I realized then that the top 2 rows hadn't been labeled, so that I went back and did those. But since I'd already started with 1, I didn't want to get confused with where that set went in the entire quilt. So these are done a little bit differently. But the idea is to just keep them together and then make sure that you're putting them in the order that you chose by how you're pairing them up. So we started with 4 patches, we cut them wonky, and then we made them into 4 patches, and then we're going to take these 4 patches and sew them to larger 4 patches, and then ultimately 8-inch patches, and then we'll be done. Okay? So that catches you up if you are not there. Let's actually talk about these spools. Okay, let me switch cameras again. I was given this set of little spools just as a thank you gift for a speech I was giving. And I find these to not be helpful. I also found it interesting that some of the colors are repeated, but it's not obvious until you get them next to each other. But since I don't care to use these spools when I'm doing handwork or on my machine, I'm spinning them onto bobbins. Now, these bobbins were a problem. They were supposed to be the right size for my machine, but the hole on one side is a little narrow, so I would have to force it down onto the bobbin winding pin. But I can use my little bobbin winder here, and it fits fine. This is just that tiny bit smaller, so I don't have to worry about breaking my machine, which is what my concern was. So I am just spinning these all up. Now, my thread in my bobbins I converted from some of the other things I was doing to these boxes. Okay, like this. So since there's a bunch of different colors here, instead of spinning up a purple one and then getting out the purple box and putting it in the purple box, I'm just using one of my rings. I'm just going to fill the ring, and then when it's full, I'll sort it into the right bins underneath. If any of the bins are full, I'll leave them in a ring. I got tons of these things. I love these for travel in particular. So that's what that is. You probably also saw when I was on the other camera, so I'll switch back, these cardboard pieces. What these are just pieces of cardboard that I had. So this Junior Mints, right? I just ran my pinking blade from my rotary cutter on both sides, and I put a slit in one end. And then that's just how I make those cardboard thread keepers that I showed you about a long time ago. When my bobbins get really low, what I will do is I will spin onto these. This is just something to just the tag ends, because I like to have something like this to travel with for doing like English paper piecing or something like that, so that I don't even have a bobbin. I just have this flat little card, and this one will hold 8 different colors. So if I was really trying to be careful and color match my threads, I can go ahead and do that. For the most part, these will only have 2 or 3 different colors on them. I have a little box that they all sit in on the edge. I pull out what I want, I throw it in my bag, and off it goes with me. So that's the kind of thing where even a bobbin is larger than what I need when it gets down to the tag ends. Now I will tell you, let me switch cameras again. These little spools don't even fill a bobbin. Look at how little there is on that. So this is a situation where if I was doing a lot of sewing, I would not want to use these in my bobbin case. There's nothing wrong with putting them on the top, because I'll see that it's run out and I can change it before I've done a whole lot of sewing and then found all my pieces have scattered across the floor as they came off the machine because there was no bobbin thread. So in this particular case, what I will do is I will put a full bobbin in the machine. I will have no more than 5 of these before I start checking. When I've done 5 of these, I will check my bobbin to make sure how much I've got left on it. And it seems strange, because you would think, since this doesn't look like it's only 1/5 of a bobbin, since it's on the smaller part on the inside, there's less thread than towards the outer edge of the bobbin. So there's actually a lot more thread in the one that's in my case at that point. So, like I said, I'll run about 5 of these, and then I'll start paying more attention. Okay, so if you've got them in the ring like this, when 5 of them are empty, you'll know, because you'll have empty bobbin cases. So when you take the last one, you put it in, you see 5, then you check. Okay, I hope that's helpful. But for today, we're going to just go ahead and work on the quilt here. All right, let's go back to camera 3. Now you can see here this thing. This is just one of my leaders and enders. This is shirting material. We had a guild challenge, the shirt off my back, and so this is a leader and ender that I had in there. And apparently, when I lined it up, I didn't line it up properly, or it shifted. So hold on a second. Nope, that's fine. Okay. I just had another one underneath that I didn't know about. There we go. So this is the one that I just sewed. So somehow I wound up with 3 under there. So I'm going to peel that wrong one off. Now, technically this is no longer leader or ender, but if I tuck this back in under like this, it'll do the job. So this can go away. What I'm doing with these is I'm sewing them into bigger patches like this, and then that will get trimmed down and put into something. Probably a half square triangle, because I kind of like the stripe and the half square. So I'll have 2 of them out of this, and they'll look very different because when you divide it like this, you can see these 3 really well, and when you divide it like that, you're going to see more of these ones. So that kind of makes it easy. So that'll be half square triangles later. But now it's time to work on our twisted 4 patch. So I'm always going to put A to B and then C to D, or in this case 1 to 2. When the original twisted 4 patches are put together, you can see that the seams are not going to align, which is nice for us. Okay. However, when I do this, one of the things that I like is to make sure that the seam on the side that I'm sewing on is facing away from me. So this is the wrong direction. At this stage, it's really easy because all you have to do is flip it to this side. And although I'm sewing these 2 together, it'll still be A1 and A2. Okay? So, let's see, now I can completely confuzzle myself here. This has been a rough day for me, so I'm sorry. I want to sew here. Oh, because these are already opposites, that's why. I'm sorry. So, yes, I'm just going to go ahead and sew these together. It was the other 4 patches that were different. Now, on my machine, I don't think you can see here. Let me try to move this in a little closer. Halfway through this foot is my 1/4 of an inch. I don't have a 1/4 of an inch foot that I can rely on this machine. Because it's one of the ones that has the metal bar that sits across the edge like this, and I found it flexed a lot. So, let me move this up here. You're not going to want to just see the tips of my fingers the whole time. Okay. Needle down. A3 and 4. Like I said, the nice thing about this particular pattern at this point is that until we're starting to put bigger pieces together, we don't have to worry about matching seams. Occasionally, they'll bump up against each other, but it doesn't happen that much. I also don't need to pin at this stage because I'm not trying to match up seams. When I am, then I will use a couple of pins after I've pressed just to make sure that the joint isn't going to slip apart while I'm sewing. Now, I'm going to run this under. My monitor is here on my table, so I kind of need to let the fabric slide underneath. Let me tip this so you can see. Okay, see, so here's the monitor. So my pieces are just going to slide underneath there, which is kind of strange, but it's the only way that I can do everything I need to do on the studio set. So, well, it's not a set. Set sounds impressive. Here in my sewing studio, okay, I'm I'm just double checking my numbers always to make sure that I'm sewing A to A, B to B, etc., because it's just too easy to grab two, like I did with that that piece earlier. I didn't even know there was another piece stuck underneath. So, just to be on the safe side, it's always good to double check. Alright, once I get these first few done, then you'll be able to see how the intersection goes between the smaller ones and the larger ones. So I have been working on my hexagon quilt. I showed you the picture of what it's going to look like last time. And it's starting to come along with the fabric pieces. I have found all of my fabrics for the bottom 20%, which is the section with the most partial hexes. And so the rest of the quilt will be a lot easier to get set up, because there'll be a lot fewer of the either 2 or 3 section hexes. So I think I mentioned it last time. So some of the hexes are cut on the diagonal, some have just a little one of the corners cut off, some there are different angles and things to make the different shapes. So what I'm doing with those, if it's just the third off, if it's just that one corner off, or it's done in half, I'm just sewing my cut pieces together, and then I align the hexie and then just put the seam where it belongs, rather than doing 2 separate English paper pieced templates. And that's been a lot easier. Now for some of the blocks, I need to, there's 3 colors, and so you can't really do that as well. So in that case, what I did is I made up paper piecing templates just for those. And those have been just working like a dream, because once those are sewn together, I pull off the paper, and then I put it on the hexie and glue baste it down. So I don't have to be super fiddly or have a lot of extra cardboard pieces of various sizes that I'm attempting to make work. And some of the angles and things would be harder to do. So that's how I'm doing some of the stranger stuff. So, oh, see, now here we go. That piece traveled along with. So this is the last pair from the top 2 rows. So we have 2 rows of the 4.5-inch 4 patches at the top and bottom. Excuse me, and 1 on the sides. Mostly because I didn't want a square quilt, and our center was square. So I just added a little bit of extra length by adding some of the 4-inch finish and 8-inch finished on the ends. Okay, so here is 1A, and here is 1B. So we have our 4 patch and our 16 patch. But luckily, they're just going to go together exactly the same. Now, actually we have a little bit of a problem here. This one is slightly small. Can you see that? I've got this little tiny bit here. So what I'm going to do is, this is my top edge, this is the point where it's going to join with 1C and 1D. So I'm going to line it up on this corner, because then when I put the pieces together, the nice thing will be is I can always trim it a little bit and everything will match nicely. Okay? So let's do this one here. Now in this particular case, since the 16 patch has more seams, I am going to sew with it on the top. I know some people prefer to have the extra seams on the bottom. I like it on the top because then I can make sure that it folds down in where it needs to go. There we go. Now we're going. Yes. So once I start getting these pieces to go under the monitor, once there's enough of them there, the weight will pull them down and keep them straight. You can actually see them hanging back here. You see them moving? All right. So as I sew, they're just going to go into a box I have down there. Okay. So 1B, 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D. So if there's any discrepancies here, I'll match them up at the top. But that's handy anyway, because that's how I normally do it, regardless. So it's been kind of interesting. Lately, I have had more clients that are quilters and who do classical music. So I have one who played the viola. I have one that played piano. Now they've never met each other, and I'm never going to introduce them to each other because that's not appropriate. But it has been kind of interesting because one of them will be talking about one of the Met Opera shows, because Scott and I like to go and watch those in the theater. And, you know, and so we'll find the music for that, for, let's say, the viola. And then I'll go to the other clients and we'll talk about the Met Opera. And she'll have the piano part to the same opera. So that's been kind of interesting lately. I don't know kind of where the synergy came there, but it certainly has. Okay, now let me pull this off here. And I know this is going to mess up my train here I was telling you about. Oh, this is my little cutter. I love this thing. It's just got a razor blade. It's an extra long razor blade. And you can just snip threads super easy with it. So here you can see we're not lining up our seams yet because this set is going to go opposite the other one. Actually, I need to do one more so that I can cut that off cleanly. So give me 1 second here. Let's see. I meant to get A and B, and I'd let it go off the end of my table. So hold on just a minute. I'll be right back. Kind of sneak around back here, not hit my head on the camera, little things like that. Okay, I'm back. Alright, now, I wanted to show you here. So this is 1A and 1B, and this is 1C and 1D. And what I do is I always press towards A and D. So when I take this downstairs later and press them, I'm going to press them the opposite directions so that when I go to match them up, my seams will be going opposite directions. And I'll be able to spin the center like I did on these. Okay? So this is a situation where once these are pressed, so I'm just going to finger press it here real quick. Alright, and I match these up like this, then I will put a pin right here just to hold that intersection together. Okay, so just on this left side, holding this flat down, I'll put that pin in, and then I'll go ahead and start at this end, because again, we're not matching at this point until I get through this intersection. Now here, because these are the 16 patches, we're going to be matching this seam as well. So I'll also put a pin, once these are butted together nice and tight, just to the top edge of that as well. So I will have 2 pins in this set. When we're doing the center of the quilt over here, right, and I'm sewing these 2 4 patches together with these 2, then I'm actually going to have more pins. I'll have 3 that go across here. Right? One for the midpoint of this one for where I've joined the 2 together, one for the midpoint here so that it lines up with these blocks. So we are doing some seam matching in this quilt, but we did not want to do it with the original 4 patches, because since we were cutting them wonky, they're not lining up, and that's exactly what we wanted. Okay? The nice thing is that even though these are being sewn into a grid, when you look at it, because the pieces are wonky, even though those seams are going to be square, it won't be as noticeable. It'll look like more of it's been cut wonky than it really has. Okay? So when we're doing the middle there, it'll take some more pins. If you're confident in your sewing and you want to align them as you stitch, that's fine. But I'm going to be doing all my pressing downstairs. I'll pin them downstairs, and then when I come up, it's just plop it in and zoom. I will probably also put one on each end just to keep them from stretching as I'm carrying things around, or if I drop them. But it will go very, very quickly to sew these together. Okay, so that's 1A, B, C, D. And that's 2. So I'm going to go ahead and keep going here. Now in this case, we can actually see it again. We are going to be matching that center seam. So I press them, again like I said, in the 2 opposite directions. So I've got one flap going to the right here, and one flap going to the left here. So these will butt together. Just like that. Now I didn't pin this because I grabbed stuff and came upstairs. So I'm just going to go ahead and put it through normally. So if you're comfortable doing this, you can. But like I said, I generally do this right when I've been done pressing. But in this particular case, I pressed the pieces, the 16 patches, and then I brought them up and re-put them on my design wall to double check that it came out the way I wanted it to. The thing with the design, just this. Oh, it's being difficult again. Oh, let's see if I can get this to tighten up. Okay. Alright, let me switch it back over. So the nice thing about this is even though everything was numbered when I dealt with it downstairs, and each one of these blocks was numbered, so whichever number this one was, it was an A, B, C, and D. I like to, once these 4 patches were done, I wanted to have one more chance to take a look at it and make sure I'd be happy with it. So just like that, when this is done and these 4 patches are, the 4-inch ones are added to the outside, I'll lay the 8-inch ones around it again just to make sure that I'm still happy before I sew them together. And that's going to work the same way, because this is going to be an 8-inch block, and this is an 8-inch block, so these will be sewn in the 4 patches with the 8-inch 4 patches. Okay? Same idea. So we'll add those on and then we'll be done, because we're only doing the 2, 4, and 8 finish sizes on the blocks. Okay? I have not mentioned this if you haven't seen me here before. You are welcome to add notes into the chat. I will respond to them. You can also email me at mail@StashBlasterQuilts.com. And what I do with that is if you've asked a question that is a little bit more general interest, then I will answer it on the live stream. I'll probably also send you a note, but I will also talk about it during the live stream. And then if it's something that's more specific, let's say you want to send me some pictures and say, I'm not happy with the colors, what do you think, about this or that, or I'm doing this kind of a quilt, what do you think? I'm happy to weigh in on that. But that would be so specific that trying to do it here doesn't make any sense. Okay? Alright, so let's keep going here. 3. There is a slight delay here, so sometimes I get hung up because I'm looking at what's going on live and you're looking at it on a few second delay. So if I happen to have flipped over to check the chat or something, I kind of distract myself a little bit, so I apologize for that. I did get an interesting email after the last live stream. If you happened to be on early I usually get on and I'll have my microphone on and everything because I've tested all of that. And I don't want to mess with it because I don't want it not working, because at the beginning stuff just did not work for me. And so I got an email from a gentleman who apparently watches, who said he loves listening to the intro part when there's nothing going on. Because he tries to figure out what I'm doing while I'm waiting to start the show. So, for example, today I was spinning up those bobbins, but sometimes I'm, scurrying around trying to get something set up, or he'll hear paper rustling, and he'll try to figure out where that's going to come into the conversation. So, that was kind of fun. If you love it or you hate it, feel free to let me know. But I do reply to emails and things like that. So if that becomes of interest, let me know. And I joined a bee. Well, it's not really a bee. It's kind of a bee. In one of my guilds, they've broken out into what they're calling bucket group lists. And so there's a whole bunch of different categories. So there's some that are trying to do specific quilts, like the farmer's wife, or that want to do featherweight maintenance. That's a very popular group. And I joined the many pieces group. Now, I'm actually listed as the advisor because I had warned the person who was in charge that I wasn't sure I'd be available very much. And so she said, well, as long, if I just wanted to be an advisor in case people had questions or problems, then I could join and do that. So I'm doing that. And it was funny because someone asked me if I had joined one of the bucket list groups, and I said yes. And she goes, well, I know which one you joined. And I said, okay, which one was it? And she looked at me square in the face and she goes, you're part of the many pieces group. And I said, well, how did you know? And she said, because you never do a quilt that doesn't have many pieces. And I had to admit she was right, because even the paper piecing, not the paper piecing, the English paper piecing one that I'm doing, is over 1,500 pieces. And that doesn't count the fact that some of the pieces, the hexagons, are in multiple pieces. So, yeah, she got me. She got me good. And so that's me. It made perfect sense. So like this little one back here, all of these half square triangles finished at 1 inch. Now there's no reason that you couldn't do it in a larger size, but this came out of my half square triangles, orphan blocks. So in my case, all I did is I pulled out all the pinks and the reds. I had to make maybe 20, maybe 30 most, just to get it to finish. But that's how it goes. So I did this one as another one to try to get rid of some of my orphan stash. And that's one of the reasons why I feel perfectly fine in the middle of the night, if I can't sleep, going ahead and sewing 4 patches or half square triangles or something, because I will use them. There's not a doubt in my mind. I do have several projects that I always have going as well. Some are brainier than others. So with that brain dump I talked about earlier today, if you have a quilting idea, jot it down. And that way you'll have it for later. You can transfer that to your design book. Because I'm sure you all have a design book. I've talked about those here. If you don't, I really recommend that you make one. And this actually came up with a friend of mine last year. She had entered a quilt, into a show. And when it showed up, somebody else's name was on it, but she saw it hanging there. And she said, well, that's my quilt. Well, the other person, whose Charmaine name was, said, no, that's my quilt. I made that quilt. And my friend pretty much lost it. Because she had put in a ton of time on that quilt. And this person was basically trying to steal it. And so my friend went back home, she got her design book, she brought it back, and she said, look, here's the original design. This is the transmutations that it took. Here's my fabric scraps that I put into it that you can see in the quilt. And here's photos during completion. And the person who was there that she was talking to turned to the person who was trying to steal it and threw her out of the show and told her she would never be allowed back. So putting the name on it, I think, might have been a mistake from the beginning. But when the person saw her name on this much nicer quilt, she decided that we had her name on it, so she should be able to get it. Obviously, 100% wrong with her. No doubt about it. But whenever there is a concern, or did you steal my pattern? Because I might create a pattern that's very similar to someone else's that I never saw that pattern. Okay? So like the hexie quilt that I'm doing is a seascape, right? Well, it could be that somebody created a very similar seascape because there is a lot of repetition in this hobby, right? So I could show, no, here's the steps that I took. I'm sorry that what I came up with was similar to yours, but it was independently derived. So having your design book for something like that is really handy. It's also nice because then you can remember something that you had been playing with that maybe you didn't do at the time. That when you look at it again later, you're like, yeah, that was a cool idea. I think I am going to try that. So for example, for me, the hexie quilt. I knew I was going to do hexies. I've been doing hexies forever. But I had this idea of the seascape and how I was going to do these multi-part pieces. Because most hexagon quilts are like Grandmother's Flower Garden, where they're all full hexagons. And then the question is, how do you arrange it? It could be in the circles, it could be in diamonds, it can be in a bunch of different ways. But they're full hexies. And I didn't want my quilt to be that rough. Okay, so that if I was doing a fish, I didn't want a lumpy fish. I wanted it, it's still not going to be smooth, but smoother, without having to actually applique something on, where I have a true curve. So I figured this out with this 1/3, 2/3 ratio for a lot of stuff, and some of the things that have, and then some of these oddball ones that were multiple colors, and so it needed these paper piecing pattern pieces. But all in all, it's not so bad. But if anybody ever said to me, well, I did a hexie underwater quilt and you stole it from me, I can go back and say, no, look, here's how I did it. This is what I did. This is what I was thinking. Here it is in the original colors that I was going to do it in, but then I changed it. Here's the sheet where I numbered them and colored them as I made them. You know, so I can make sure that I can show that I am not a bad actor. Okay? Could someone do that anyway and still say that I just copied? Yes. People who know me know that I don't, because I can't follow a regular pattern to save my soul. I always have to twist it somehow. But it's a nice way to be able to prove, yes, this is mine, this is how I derived it, etc. It's also nice if you start doing quilt shows, you know, like a trunk show or something, where you've got the whole history behind it, who you made it for, why you made it, why you picked those colors, and to be able to tell the story when you show the quilts. I like being able to do the storytelling when I'm doing a trunk show, just because it, this is a very personal hobby for a lot of us, where it doesn't matter so much what the pattern is as for whom we're making it and why we're making it and the feelings we have as we make it. So if I'm making a charity quilt, I'm generally trying to think nice thoughts about humanity, okay? The thinking that this is going to keep someone warm who's lost everything. This is going to show them that there are people who care, etc. If I'm doing something for a family member, then I'm going to be thinking about how much I care for that family member and some of the old stories about that family member. So a lot of times I laugh as I sew. Those kinds of things, I feel, go into the quilt. Now, yes, this is hippy dippy spooky, you know, kind of stuff. I'm not trying to say that I'm actually placing an aura into the quilt or anything like that. But I think when things are done with goodwill, it tends to be done better. Okay, so if I'm mad at somebody and I have to make them something, I'm not going to be putting my best effort into it. But if I am thinking kind thoughts and loving thoughts of the person that I'm giving it to, I'm going to slow down. I'm going to take my time. I'm going to make sure that it's properly constructed. I'm going to make sure that the colors are pleasing and that it's going to make that person happy to receive this. And I think all that comes around. So that's part of my process as well. And so the attitude makes a big difference when I'm sewing. So that's just one of those things that I did want to bring up here, because for a lot of us, we think, I have to get this quilt done. You know, I'm making it for this baby. I'm just going to get it done. Can you have on a movie? Can you have on a DVD? Can you have on a quilting television show that you're streaming or whatever? Sure. Please do. Please feel free. But I really think that we also need to make sure that when we're doing this, we get the relaxation out of it that we need. That's one of the reasons why people sew, is that we want to relax. We want to reduce that stress that's in our lives by giving ourselves something to do that we enjoy. It can also be stressful. This machine has been cursed more than once. Cursed at, I should say. Because, dang it, it's slipping a stitch or it's doing whatever, and then I have to switch it out with another machine. Now I got to get it repaired, so my stress actually goes up instead of down. But for the most part, my goal when I sit behind the machine is to relax. And one of the best ways to relax is to think kind and generous thoughts. So next time you sew, please pay attention to how you're feeling about it, because I like to have that kind of a history with it. I like to be able to tell the stories. I like to tell people what I was thinking about when I was sewing it. And all of that goes into that design book, because 10 years from now, I'm not going to remember who this red and white quilt was for. Now, it happens to be that this red and white quilt was for me. But if I gave it away, who did I make it for? Why did I make it? Why was it those particular colors? And so for me, it helps me to know that. I do a lot of quilts, little ones like this, that I use when I teach. But if I was making it for someone else, I would have a better story, to be honest with you. But everything is scalable, so it all works out in the end. So, the design book. If you don't have one, start one. Okay? At some point, I will have a video on it. Oh, by the way, if there is something you'd like me to talk about in specific here on the chat, let's say you want to know more about English paper piecing or improvisational quilting or inspiration, I did put out a poll to those of you who watch, and I did get back responses that people would like to see the architecture as quilting inspiration, a PowerPoint that I was going to do. It's not been something I've been able to get ready for tonight. I'm hoping to get it ready for next time. And so I showed you a couple of other PowerPoints where I talked about inspirational things in them, but this will be strictly architecture. So we'll do that one of these next few live streams. But if there's something that you want to know more about, please put it in the chat, shoot me an email, whatever works for you, and I'll be happy to talk about whatever it is. My husband did make me promise that there are some topics that are off limits, but other than that, if you want to know about the trips that I'm taking, if you want to know about the seminars that I'm teaching, if you want to know practically anything, I'm really an open book on most things. So anyway, in order to do more sewing, I would have to pull them off the walls, which would have you looking at my tushy here. So I'm not going to do that. I will do that another time. Something else that I want to talk about in terms of your studio. When a lot of us go on retreats, we eat while we sew. Okay? So when we have our quilt camp for the Springfield Quilters Unlimited, people bring snacks and we're all eating and we're sewing and we're doing all of this all at the same time. I would not recommend that you eat and sew on a regular basis because it's almost a guarantee that if you have a brownie or something, it's going to get on your shirt or your pants, and then when you bring the fabric up through, it's going to rub into the chocolate, or if you have something red that you're drinking, whether it's wine or Kool-Aid or anything else, you can ruin a quilt really easily. And it almost always happens in those last few seams that put the big pieces together that finish the quilt, that something horrible happens. So, if you want to have a snack to eat while you sew, I honestly recommend something in this variety. Okay, so these are chocolate. They make peanut butter candy coated candies. Anything that you can eat without getting stuff on your hands is fine. I have been known to want things like cheese balls, but instead of eating them with my fingers, because then I would have orange on everything. Even if you wash your hands, there's still an orange stain. I'll use a bamboo skewer, and I'll just poke it, and then I'll eat it off the skewer, and that keeps my hands clean for sewing. Just a thought. I like to make sure I always have something like M&Ms or some other kind of chocolate or something here, in case I'm sewing in the middle of the night. Because I don't necessarily want to have to go downstairs if I'm feeling peckish. And so I can just grab a few and then go. If you can't stop, because some people, I can have candy in the house and not eat it. But I have a friend who, for her, she can not have it in the house and be fine, but if it's in the house, she's eating it. So keep that kind of stuff in mind and plan accordingly. Okay? So that if you are coming in, if you're not the kind of person who can stop, then if you have like the little snack bags and you want to have a snack bag of M&Ms or something, and then maybe you have some in your freezer, or you have some somewhere else, or you just don't buy a big bag, you only buy the little snack bags, so that you have a definite stop. I'll open one, but I won't open two. Okay? That kind of thing makes a big difference in a sewing room as well. I always recommend that if you are going to have those foods, that you have them set in such a way that it's completely clear of the throat of your machine, so that you don't knock over a bowl full of whatever onto the floor and potentially onto the quilt. So the snowman I showed you is very heavy. My fabric going past it is not going to hurt it, and when I'm putting bigger pieces together, I move it completely out of the way. My drink is on the completely wrong side of the machine. It's on the end that has the knob and then the big column part of my machine. So it's out of the way unless I'm sewing or quilting a large piece, in which case it moves over. Okay? So do some planning for your projects in terms of how you want to have your environment set up. And if you have a space down below your table maybe to keep your drink or whatever, I do have, and I don't have it up here, since I use this table both for sewing and for the computer, because where my machine sits is an adjustable shelf, so I can move it up, put my keyboard on it, move it down, and put my sewing machine and my clear acrylic table on. I don't have it on this table, but I have something, I think it was called a sip and stitch, but it clamped onto my table, and it had a holder for a cup, and you could put like a mug or a drinking glass type thing on there, and it had a bag for threads and scraps and stuff like that you don't want to keep, and so that was really handy to have right next to me. What I have now is, I actually took the pin cushion downstairs. This has a button that hangs off of a pin cushion that I have, and the pin cushion was built onto a bathroom tile with walnuts on the top, and then this is my little scrap bag thing, and it has a plastic bag on the inside, so I can fill the plastic bag and then just yank it and dump it, and I'm not chasing after all the little threads that would get stuck in here. So this is a nice way to handle your little pieces as well. of course, you can just have a trash can right next to you. Since I mentioned this, I'm digging in my trash. Is that bad? I mentioned these multi-part hexagons. So since I mentioned them, I might as well show you what I mean. Because in one of these, I explained that I made these hexagons. Oh, that's the wrong one. That's just a regular one. I made the hexagons to test the pattern so that I would be sure that it was going to work the way I thought it was going to work. And I only have the third and well, that's not very helpful. But it'll show you the thirds and the halves. So hold on one second. So rather than sewing the whole, rather than making all the hexagons and then finding out that my system wouldn't work, or that I didn't like part of how it came out, I made paper hexagons. I used the same punch that I used to do the cardstock for the fabric. So, here, let me pull this one off. So traditionally, you would just have full hexes like that. Okay? But what I did with some of them is I split them in half. So, one color on one side and one on the other. And then there's these. Okay? Where I put together, I'm calling this a third. It's not really a third, but it kind of is. I'm calling this 2/3 just because it's a larger percentage of the hex. Okay? And so I sewed the fabric, and then I would take the seam, press it open, lay my hexagon on it, wrap it around, and it'll look like this when it's done. So when I put this back in on the quilt, you can see it angles this way, and then this one angles the same direction. The tape is getting stuck, that's why it's not moving very easily. So I can have a smoother curve up my kilt. Now in this case, I do have some little pieces like this, and some half pieces, because I want the bottom of my quilt to be square. These little pieces here square off the bottom of the quilt. And on the side here, if this was the outer edge, I would need a half in order to go up the sides. So I am using some of the 1/2 size and some of the little wedge size, but those are just to finish off my edges because I want a nice square quilt when I'm done. Well, rectangular quilt. It'll be 48 by 72, I think. 73, something like that. So that's a quilt you're going to be hearing about for a long time because it's going to take a long time to sew it. But it's coming along, and I will show you as the process keeps going where I am, and I'll tell you, I'll keep you updated. But so that's what I meant by the 1/3 and the 1/2. So instead of just having hexagon, 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 you know, looking like this, and then just like sliding over a bit, and then hexagon, 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 by putting in these other shapes, I'm getting a smoother transition. So it does this instead. It's still not curves, but it kind of gives the illusion of curves, kind of like ocean waves quilts. Don't have any real curves in them, but they look like they do from a distance. So that's kind of the basic illusion I was going for without it being a seriously strong illusion. It just, I wanted to smooth some things out. So I hope that that was interesting. Okay, it is almost time. So again, please, if you've enjoyed yourself, like, subscribe, hit the bell so that you're reminded when I'm coming on. And when I can post something, you'll know about it first. And then, again, I'm going to be in Scottsbluff, Nebraska, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Chicago, Illinois between now and September. So I can't do any quilt shops or guilds in Scottsbluff. I don't have time because we're flying out there. I've been known to drive that far, but in this particular case we're flying, so I can't add to my itinerary. but for Pittsburgh or Chicago, I can. And so if you know a quilt shop or a guild who might be interested in a chat, a seminar or a workshop, please let them know about me and send them to StashBlasterQuilts.com. And I would be happy to talk to them about stopping on my way there or my way back and doing a presentation for them. So have a wonderful couple of weeks. I will see you the third Wednesday of the month, 7 o'clock, right here. I hope you had a good time, and just have a nice, relaxing time sewing sometime in the next couple of days. All right? See you later. Bye-bye.